Our topic is alternate and virtual realities. We're hoping, as we go through this, is we have a troika of, if you will, subject matters that we'd like to touch on, and those are virtual worlds, gaming, and augmented realities, all right? We want this to be very, very interactive, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our panelists first introduce themselves, because they're very, very, and you were constrained in your opening introduction. You can do more. There's more. I've talked to him. He's had many, many interesting facets. But sir, Brian, can we have you start out and introduce yourself? Because you're one of the most fascinating people most of us will ever be lucky enough to meet.
Well, that's good. You've gone beyond Brian, the digestive aid, to being a fascinating person. I'll see what I can do. Is there any feedback yet?
No. Wow.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, go.
Do you have any feedback? Hey, guys. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the Director of Research for a nonprofit called the National Institute for Technology and Liberal Education. We research emerging technologies and help our campuses cope with them and use them, primarily for teaching and learning, but also for research. I'm based in Vermont, so this is the warm, sunny South for me, and I'm very glad to be here for that. I work in a few different subfields, including social media, gaming, and mobile devices. I give talks, I teach workshops, I do a lot online, and that's some of the things that I work on. When it comes to this session here, one thing that I have been working on, I would like to hear from you guys, possibly today, it has to do with futures methods. I've been trying to introduce academia to the fact that people have been thinking about emerging technologies for a while. That comes as a shock in a lot of higher education, but I've been teaching people about Delphi methods. In fact, I'm running a second Delphi project now, and I run a futures market for technology in higher education. So I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts about methods like that in 2009.
Super.
Well, and since I guess I didn't really introduce myself at the last panel that I was on. So it's fascinating. Actually, if you dig up, I think the last presentation that I posted on my SlideShare account, if you go to slideshare.net/dan.kelson, you'll see a picture of me that looks remarkably like him, except I never had the long beard because I can't grow that, but I had hair down my back about that far. So there's some odd synchronicity here going on. Are you my future self?
Are you mine?
So, and it is interesting that things kind of boomerang around. Typically, I see myself as a futurist, hopefully in the now as well, because the future is fun, except that I'd like to help make the future happen. So I was prepared when I first volunteered to be on this panel that I was going to be the naysayer, that this is all junk, nobody's doing it, it's totally uncool, it's not, there's no money to be made, it's totally useless. And then I had an experience about 2 weeks ago in Seattle. I was doing an Enterprise 2.0 training course, 2 different courses, one for an internal team and one for a bunch of public people that had been invited. And it was fascinating because in the Enterprise 2.0 umbrella, are people familiar with Enterprise 2.0 as a term at all? Some of you just nodded off and aren't coming back. So from my definition of Enterprise 2.0, virtual realities, prediction markets, those kind of things perfectly fit, because I have a disease where I see connections between everything, so pizza fits in my definition of Enterprise 2.0. But normally when I mention virtual worlds, alternative realities and whatnot in E2L, then everybody passes out and says, can't we talk about wikis and blogs and all that other cool social stuff, except that I had three employees of the state of Washington, government workers, who said, well, actually, we use Second Life all the time, every day in our personal and professional life. One guy spends way too much time in his personal life. He has a katana-wielding ninja, and he spends a lot of time speaking Spanish to people in Second Life. So I don't quite understand that, but as part of their job, they actually live in the virtual world of Second Life, which blew my mind, and I thought was fascinating, and I mean, I would love to hear how anybody here might be living in that sort of world, and we'll hit the other topics. But the funny thing is that people used to look at me like I was insane when about 15 years ago I created a course 2 companies ago when we were talking, this is the very early days of the web, if you can remember that far back, in a course on intranets, I actually fired up a copy of Doom, if you remember that game, one of the first multiplayer, IP-based 3D interactive games, and I said, this is the potential future of your workforce without shooting your coworkers and zombies and Nazis and all. And a lot of people said, what in the world are you talking about? Until I had a couple Marines who were in my class then who said, we're actually using this kind of stuff to simulate horrible situations that we hope that our troops never have to experience, but they'll have experienced it virtually, and therefore they'll, instead of freaking out and running away, they'll actually stay and do their job. So I'm not saying we're all going in that direction, but there's this huge, there's a lot of past history that even for, I don't spend all that much time in virtual worlds per se, but there's a big history that most of us are not aware of and that we could be taking advantage of. So I'd love to hear how that pans out as we go on.
I guess we are. Oh, sorry. We are all tribes. We are the innovator tribe, and we're the CIO tribe, and we're the student tribe, and we're the venture capitalist tribe, and we're the solution partners tribe, if you will. All right, but now in the tribes of if you will, the tribe, and there are multiple tribes inside these virtual worlds. All right, so but let's ask an existential question. All right, why should the tribes out here? Those 4 tribes I talked about are assembled, if the curated audience, why should they care about what's going on in virtual worlds?
That's a great question. If we're talking about virtual worlds generally, if we're looking at, say, massively multiplayer online gaming, one reason is simply that that's a ginormous industry. I mean, gaming passed movies some years ago. It's equal in size as a global industry to music. Gaming is way past reading. That's an enormous, enormous field. So simply watching that industry is enough.
Gaming is way past reading? Did you just say that?
I'm afraid so, in numbers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, if we're talking about industries and size, that's significant. And if you never play a computer game, if you never touched it, if you think of Pong as a cutting-edge game, your laptop has already changed before you've done anything with it. Unless it's a Mac, in which case games don't matter very much. But PCs are not designed with high-end sound cards.
Apple, not a sponsor.
Quite true. But they're not designed with high-end sound cards and video cards because you can play Excel. They're designed because of the likelihood that as a user of computers, you're probably playing a casual game like Chuzzle or Snood or Solitaire or a high-end game. That's why you can have Skype taking advantage of this kind of thing. So if you never look at a virtual world, it's already changed the world around you. A second is that increasingly we have advertisers, we have other companies moving into virtual worlds, not Second Life very much, but other games. So for example, has anyone here played Rock Band or any of the Now, more often, if you're older...
Keep those hands up, those youngsters in the room. Look at you guys are so in tune. Larry, you go, baby.
If you haven't played one of these, you absolutely have to. Go to a computer store or go find one of these people in the room here and play one just to get the tactile experience. Because among other things, they've become venues for marketing music. Because you have teenagers playing these games and learning about these strange musical groups with names like Led Zeppelin they've never heard of, and then buying them. So now it used to be that these game companies had to kind of dance and negotiate to get the labels interested. Now the labels are competing to sell through these. So the music, the transmission belt, the marketing has already begun to change. That's a couple of huge reasons.
It's really big. I mean, I was really struck by this. I'm pleased to be. I'm sort of an interloper. I mean, our real moderator unfortunately is sick. But I mean, in my world, something becomes real when NPR talks about it, right? And so so I'm an old fart. I mean, but no, they actually said basically this whole thing of games and virtual worlds. They said if Beethoven was alive today, he'd be writing the scores for basically video games and basically virtual worlds. I mean, this really is the cutting edge, and frequently we don't get to see that. So what do you see? I mean, now the advertising agencies are coming in, and a very important thing here is this whole idea of the fact that there are, we say, virtual worlds, because they're multiples, all right? And they are actually segmenting their marketing efforts inside the worlds because there are different people inside that.
Just as a tip, Thornton just offered a secret about dealing with higher education. Follow NPR. that is the single most powerful unifying force in higher education. It's stronger than fear of parking. If you hear something in NPR, college presidents, assistant professors, they all know it. I mean, suddenly it just happens. I mean, it's worth it. I think, well, I'm hogging the mic. Why don't you take a turn?
We should have the virtual audience here. Is there a virtual audience already? Is there a Second Life community right here?
I've been Twittering it, and I'm waiting to see if I get any questions. I'll relay them.
Okay. So, so the gaming thing is funny. So, some more weird synchronicity about connections through my life. So I went to Berklee College of Music, thought I was going to be a rock star, and then I decided I didn't like performing and there was no money in it. So what do? I do professional speaking instead, which is pretty much the same thing. It just pays better, primarily. Rock band is interesting. So, I went to the college that most good musicians fail out of or leave and go make a lot more money than I have. I thought that Rock Band, Guitar Hero, all that was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard because I spent years learning how to play instruments. And then a fellow musician at a software conference happened to have it at their demo booth, killing time while nobody was in the trade show floor. Said, well, I was like, this is idiotic. Who would do this? And he said, well, why don't you just try it? And I'm a keyboard player. I used to play guitar, and I gave that up because at Berklee, of the 5,000 students, 3,500 of them are guitarists. Turns out most of them were much better at guitar than I was. But I have to say, it was a lot of fun to play the virtual guitar. I always got along really well with the drummers in my band, so I always played air drums. Let's see if I'm any good at playing mostly real drums. Turns out I'm pretty good at mostly real drums. And now I have kids that are 7 and 4, and they love Rock Band. My daughter will sing her heart out. My son wails on the drums, and he's very good at it. So my future rests on them. Hopefully this is great training for the future. But the fascinating thing is the computing power that it takes to make Rock Band come alive. I mean, the virtual world that you're living in and playing it is pretty darn impressive. The computing power that it takes to render that dynamic virtual interface is kind of insane. But that didn't happen by accident. It's because there was money there from the entertainment world, which I think a lot of people write off that, even the worst movie that you've ever seen costs a heck of a lot of money. It took a lot of effort to pull that together. And that has all been driving all of us to be able to take advantage of Skype, cloud computing, the internet itself, was funded by DARPA, but it's been taken over clearly by the commercial interests that we're all, most of the businesses of the world today are built on that infrastructure that if it hadn't been pushed by media, by, entertainment and all that, then we would be a lot farther behind than we are right now. So the whole virtual world thing, I think it's interesting how it sort of leads and lags. Someday I have to get a graphic of it. Are people familiar with a double pendulum? One end is fixed, it's swinging, and then there's another one attached to the bottom of it. So instead of, we don't have this cyclical thing going, just simple back and forth, and I'm not like a chaos math guy, but there's a whole bunch of things, it's like this whole cascade of things that are all combining, and we're swinging computing power, networking power, 3D visualization, audio, all this stuff has combined to put so much computing power at our fingertips that we have no idea what to do with it. But you can't, again, like I said this morning, you can't begin to take advantage of it if you're not taking any advantage of it whatsoever. So what we're doing on our desktop, I mean, for the most part, it's total waste, as we heard in the green session. The power that you're using just to turn on your bloody laptop, maybe you should just pick up a piece of paper and use that, because we're not tapping the ability that's in there.
One of the tribes I omitted, and my apologies, is that one of the most important tribes in the room are educators. Right? Mm-hmm. And Brian, you are an educator, and you are actually educating people to prepare for these worlds. So could you share some of your philosophy? I mean, what is it? How are you preparing them for these worlds, and what type of world will they ultimately go into?
This sounds a bit like a cartoon character, Educator, like Skeletor.
Transformer.
Transformer. Oh, you're mentioning bad movies that were expensive. I saw Transformers too.
I like that movie.
I hate you. But so you're one of two people who liked it, right? But well, we've seen a few things. Starting about 6 years ago, there was a lot of interest in education and gaming because an educational psychologist made the very powerful argument that if you look at a computer game, unlike an analog game, a computer game has to teach you how to play it. So if you can think back to when you were a kid and you first picked up a chess set or a checkers set or a deck of cards, there wasn't an instruction manual with it usually. Or if you picked up cards and asked a euchre player, they would exploit you ruthlessly and take all of your money before teaching you all the rules. Computer games can't do that. They have to teach you how to play or else they fail, and the marketplace is very competitive. So the scholar named James Paul G figured out that games are actually pedagogical objects. Regardless of what they teach, they have to train you up on something. And there's actually an awful lot of pedagogical innovation that's been going on in gaming. So if you can think about tutorials, if you can think about the ways that games scaffold you, they're very, very careful in assessing you and your quality, your skill at something, and then challenging you up further and further. Even the dumbest game has to do this. So one thing that we can do is look at these and learn and see what principles are at work. A second thing is that we're looking at using games to deliver some educational content. This can be at a kind of static way where we have game studies as a field, because games are such a large human endeavor. Studying them, analyzing them, teaching about them is a field. And the second is using them to teach other skills. How many of you here have played World of Warcraft? Show of hands. Okay, you can tell because
how many of you know people who played World of Warcraft?
That's like an urban legend, right? You know, oh, my cousin's best friend's hairdresser, right? You know,
Wild Widow, there you go.
a Wild Widow, yes.
Wow.
Well, you can always tell World of Warcraft players because they're always like, yay! If you ask, how many of you play, you know, Age of Conan? People are like, yeah, me. Yeah. Or you ask them, do you play EVE Online? And their brain is so hosed that they can't even move anymore. But there have been scholars who've been looking at teenagers playing World of Warcraft and other massively multiplayer online games, realizing the amount of teamwork skills these students learn is so large that's quite practical. Seton Hall, among other schools, have been using various kinds of multiplayer game environments to teach virtual teams, which is a simple business skill that we need to have. That's the second thing. The third is the library world. Libraries are our cultural heritage custodians. They're the ones who preserve things. 8-track, they had to think about that. VHS versus beta, they went through that. DVD, now Blu-ray and HD, you're concerned about that. They have to figure out what to preserve. Now libraries, public and academic across the United States, are looking at games, trying to figure out what should they keep, what should they copy, what should they emulate, how should they make them public. Those are a few ways that we're beginning to engage with this already.
Questions from the audience, just because it's going to be very, very interactive about that. Yes, sir. Larry. Sorry.
Seeing that? One of the things that I would expect that virtual reality and or gaming would permit you to do is large-scale simulation without a known outcome. One of the things that I hate to say it, but I'm going to. I heard on NPR. Was a guy, a university prof. He was clearly a younger guy who was trying to figure out. We've had this great experiment right now in the U.S. economy with respect to injecting capital into different industries. I won't engage in that politically dynamic discussion, but the whole idea of using simulation capability to actually figure out what could have happened. And this whole idea of social networks and social media, that's actually a potential application that we haven't necessarily availed ourselves of. But if we really wanted to have figured out what would happen if we stuck $700 billion into the economy across a range of different industries, some effective, some ineffective, what could have been the outcome, particularly using that type of social media platforms? I mean, is that something that you guys would see on a go-forward basis as frankly, a brand new line of business?
Thank you.
Take a first back.
Stay away from the speaker.
That wasn't me.
From the speaker. Nobody gets hurt.
See, one benefit of having gone to Berklee College of Music, you don't run in front of speakers with microphones in your hand. But that's been useful for me in my adult life. I think there's something called like superstructures, superstruct. See, there we go. Those kinds of simulations have been run. They're just not terribly well known because if we get to that sort of hints at prediction markets, which is Extremely powerful, but so very hard to wrap your head around how to actually use the darn things. So are people actually familiar with prediction markets? For those of you that read The Tipping Point or James Surowiecki's Wisdom of Crowds, the Iowa futures market, I believe it's called. At the simplest level, if you're using, eventually we're going to elect the next president, and the election is one market, and there will be an outcome, but there are other markets that try to predict what the actual outcome is going to be. So when it's a known outcome versus the unknown that you were talking about, it's a lot easier to get your head around. But we know that there are only certain candidates. It's going to get winnowed down. It's like in sports, there's no team's just going to be invented out of thin air at the last day of the World Series. It doesn't work that way. You'd have to filter down through all the layers to get to that end point. Prediction markets tend to be incredibly, as long as there's enough participants in the markets, they tend to be extremely good at actually predicting things. Variety of inputs rather than just specialists having only their exposed expertise and presuming that they know everything, which nobody knows everything, so there's a failed assumption right there. The prediction market stuff is extremely powerful. The simulations, so Superstruct is a whole set of virtual assumptions where they play out scenarios with, I think they had millions of participants in that? No, so hundreds of thousands. Not nearly enough, and they're horrible at marketing, apparently. So nobody knows about it except for the two of us in this entire room. But it's, so they'll build scenarios like what happens for a future scenario where peak oil is real, it just happened, and suddenly we're going to run out of the existing oil that we've already pumped out and know how to deal with it in 5 years. What's that going to do to societal norms, to money? What's the new money in this world? What happens when gold disappears? What happens when we no longer have enough water to grow crops? All those kind of things. So if you saw Mad Max, that's a good approximation for the kinds of things they talk about. But they actually have learning outcomes as a result because they have people participating and they see what happens in this virtual environment. We don't really know what's going to happen until it happens, but they can play out some things like, well, that was clearly not the way to go because we did some, fiscal incentive to try and stem this, and instead it burst up over here. So it's definitely there. It's very hard to get your head around how to do it, how to get enough participants, how to frame it, and in the end, it's sort of guesswork because it's only a certain number of people that have been participating in that.
One thing is there's good news. I mean, what you've just described, I think, really, really well is, do you remember when we used to think about Yahoo as competitor to Google? Remember back then? And people would say that Google had the advantage of being masters of algorithms, but Yahoo had the mastery of social interaction. This is when they bought Delicious, when they bought Flickr, and they were doing stuff. Back when they still had brain cells. Yahoo is not a sponsor of this, is it? That's because that would have been smart. That would have been useful. But there's what you just described as a similar split, where we can. Maybe what you were asking is thinking about large computational simulations where we can plug a whole bunch of things in, step back, and there's a lot of movement in e-science and in web science to automate these kind of things. There are a lot of limitations that people familiar with forecasting know. These can't simulate black swans unless you manually plug them in. But the other is the social part. And I think the social part is one which we are seeing a lot more possibility about to happen, because I don't know if you haven't been following gaming, how many of you have looked at little kids with webkins? Anybody? If you haven't, go find a stranger child and approach them. I do this all the time. I make friends everywhere. And these webkins are little stuffed animals that have a virtual life online that's in parallel. This sounds geeky and odd, and it is totally mainstream. It is entirely across the chasm. You have little kids, 4 years old, who are memorizing passwords, going to a browser, and then asking to buy virtual goods to add to their virtual stuff, ferret or whatever it is. That's really commonplace, yeah.
Well, so that's an interesting thing, because I read a paper a couple of years ago that the size 2 years ago of the economy in real dollars inside Second Life was like the 60th biggest economy in the world, and I'm sure that in World of Warcraft it's even larger in real dollars, because there were real dollar exchanges between the economy inside and out, to the extent that the IRS was trying to figure out how to tax it.
Which they've kind of backed off on doing, in part because there's a major theoretical equivalence. Talking about 2009, right? There's a major theoretical model of how many dollars there were, but there's actually not less equivalence actually going on. But the fields I'm talking about, Webkins, is much larger. There are millions and millions and millions of these toys. And these are little kids, hang on one second, these are little kids that are now getting, already, they're not geeks, they're not IT people, they're not librarians, they're not media scholars, they're average everyday folk, and they're ready to participate in this kind of social simulation. So, I mean, this morning we were talking about crowdsourcing marketing. This market, these crowds, are gamers. That's part of their basic literacy. That's a profound historical shift that changes business on a simple bread and butter level. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to...
That's okay. I heard John Seeley Brown talk about this one time, and he posed this question to the audience. He said, what's the difference between this and NASDAQ? And that's a pretty good question. Is reality and this starting to converge a bit?
Well, there's market simulation goes back to Wall Street, but and of course Harvard has been, among others, producing fabulous business simulations for quite some time. But there are actually games that run virtual markets in different ways. I mean, we're just talking about some futures markets. I run several of these, which are fascinating to follow. But there's a science fiction game from Denmark called EVE Online, where you have people who build giant spacecraft and they fight and they have battles, and their economic model is so complex that teenagers playing it need to have Excel open in order to keep up with it. It's been studied by scholars because EVE's economic system is enormously complex. The game is sustainable, it just prints money. I mean, it's a really powerful game. Requires high-end computers, which are widespread enough. But already, you have stock markets and trades and crashes and people gaming the system insider trading already built in there. I mean, I think, yes, there's a lot of convergence. I think Brown is right about that. But I should say, last fall, when we launched our predictions market, several of the CIOs who were participating said, Brian, thank you for launching this. It's a market I can feel good about. And games often bring people because they make us feel good. This is, by the way, this is all emerging present stuff. We haven't really been doing futures this hour.
Right, yeah.
We haven't really gotten further forward. We will in a second. But first, the librarian.
As a librarian.
A round of applause for librarian. Civilization exists. Yay!
Thank you, librarian.
I have a question. From virtual reality to physical reality to economics. When I buy a book and put it on a shelf, there's a fixed cost, and I have to catalog it, and it goes on the shelf, kind of thing, and maintain it. And then as I go toward journals and databases go up about 6% a year, journals about 9% a year. Things in Second Life, libraries are in there, National Science Foundation is in there, a bunch of people are in there, but there's a whole bunch of costs with the resources in there as well. And we end up no longer worrying about copyright, but instead worrying about licensing, which is much more complex and much more restrictive, and it's different for every single database and journal that we own. And I wonder, where is this all going? And how can my budget cannot grow by 6 and 9% each year. As a matter of fact, it shrinks sometimes by 6 or 9% in a year. So how can I maintain resources, deliver what needs to be delivered to our students, and still go down these exciting paths?
You're right.
Well, so changing economics. So this is a university setting that you're talking about, which we could extrapolate out. It is interesting. So I personally stayed away from the Kindle for a while, even though I desperately wanted it, and I gave away 25 diaper boxes full of books a year or two ago. Thank God for Costco, by the way. But I gave those away to my library because I had no space in my house anymore between that and toys for my kids. So I'm very happy to now be the owner of a Kindle 2, except that and digital rights management stuff on iTunes. As a musician, I insist on paying for all my music. Just because I left the profession doesn't mean that I want to screw everybody that's still there. So I've spent way too much money on media of various kind, and the licensing thing is quite tricky. even from an individual standpoint, because what rights do you have to the content that, like all the software we're running, you don't actually own. You have a license to use it until lightning strikes or Microsoft decides that they are going to change the agreement and suddenly you don't own it anymore. In a lot of good ways, in the way that it's affected me and my business, in the way that we do business with our clients who are moving towards the cloud. If it takes away the upfront costs, in literal cost or in the amount of space that it takes to store information, then maybe that buys you enough time to figure out how you're going to address the longer term of the ramifications of the content that you need to store, whether in Second Life or a database or whatever it happens to be. It seems like, especially this year, things have kind of changed a little too quickly, perhaps, to rejigger the economic model for the suppliers versus the consumers or the intermediaries. Hopefully the benefit is that we do have richer access to information. I don't know how to even go to a physical library anymore, because I spend all my time consuming books either through the online interface to my library, and then I'll go get the book that I've asked them to set aside for me, or I spend far too much money with Amazon. And with the on-demand, this session here, there's a fair number of laptops, but if you go to the West Coast especially, and you go to any conference, get-together, meetup, whatever, and everybody has 2 laptops on them, and they're all both open and streaming real-time information. It's quite an experience to see what's changed in the ability of the technology. So you're doing a presentation and you mention a book, and suddenly everybody just downloaded that book and they're reading it as you're presenting. That's a pretty huge change in the way that information is shared and understood.
As a speaker, you're going, I'm still here.
Right, yeah. Yeah, if it's your book, then great, because you just minted money 2 ways. That's fantastic. I hear. I'm too lazy to write a book, so I don't know. So what is the trade-off on the ability that the technology provides you versus the downside of fixed budgets or shrinking budgets versus the responsibility that you have as your institution? That's still getting sort of invented on the fly. My hope is that, since I do taxonomy work and I care about information, because that's the name of our company is Information Architected, how can you build, from my standpoint, how can you build an architecture that lets you rejigger the way that you need to have your spend to store the information, to access the information, how you deal with all the other suppliers. There's a woman here from Associated Press who has similar issues on how to get paid from all the people that use that content at decreasing cost, because it's free. It's the Associated Press. It's all kind of on the fly being redone. There's no explicit answer, unfortunately, I don't think.
If I could jump in, we've got our 3 tracks that we're going to be talking about. So now we sort of blended, if you would, the world, virtual worlds and gaming. Do you actually see that happening? I mean, because is it games actually are virtual worlds, or to the various tribes in the room here? I mean, should we be thinking of them as distinct and different, and how in the?
I'll take a quick stab at that. Let me ask. Let's see. How many of you have looked at or seen kids playing Disney's Virtual Magic Kingdom? 1. That moved really quickly. How about Club Penguin? Oh, yes. Yes. If you haven't seen these are very technologically simple, 2-dimensional virtual worlds aimed at kids. And if you think you have privacy compliance issues, just think about Disney trying to get 5-year-olds online. They were serious about that. One of the things about this is that virtual worlds tend to work when they have a purpose that's clearly defined and exciting to people. Most of the virtual world projects out there are either really still nascent, experimental, or failed. I mean, Google pulled the plug on one. Do you guys remember the name of that? Room full of smart technologically savvy business people, and they can't remember a Google project. That tells you how badly it went. It was called Lively, and clearly it wasn't very lively. Second Life itself is right now is plateauing at about 550,000 users. Pew Internet American Life Project did a survey of games played by teenagers, and the second to last was Virtual Worlds, including all of them, including Second Life, Club Penguin, Habbo Hotel. But we love games when there's a purpose. So one piece of it is if you can jump in, not for the sake of having an environment, but for the sake of slaying an orc, conquering a place, or playing the game, the virtual Colorado budget. Have you guys seen this game from Colorado College where you can rebalance the state of Colorado's budget? It's a tough game. Try it. It's realistic. I mean,
invade Canada.
That's the last-ditch Michigan plan. Because they have to go south to that one part of Canada, right? Yeah. But it's a key difference. Virtual worlds right now, we're not seeing a lot of widespread attraction for those by themselves. Has anyone here played Sony's At Home? The lack of hands going up is a kind of quick answer to that question.
We're blowing through sponsors pretty quickly here.
But they're not here.
I know. That's good. So with that now I know you wanted to talk. Oh, a question by.
Something like the Wii is actually making the virtual world and virtual games more accessible, or you think it's killing that industry? Because it could go either way, right?
No. Did you see that provocative report from a Gartner researcher last year, which said that we should expect to see mouse and keyboard becoming a minority input device? It was I recommend looking at this. I can give you a URL if you want. It's a really provocative. It's a great discussion bomb because it really makes you think, well, wait, that doesn't make sense, except for the Wii. Except for you think about the iPhone, right? You can think about the Kindle, which you barely need to use text at all, right? You just play. You can think about voice recognition because you can, the Windows mobile phone for the has Bing activated, iPhone has Google activated. And it might be we don't see this. So I don't think. And of course, there's Microsoft's Project Natal. If you haven't seen that video, you absolutely have to. Yeah. This is gesture-based computing where you can stand in front of an interface and interact with it. I want to put my cats in front of it and see what happens. But I think that's just transformative.
So great. You stalk children and abuse animals.
I give my cat something to do. This is a gesture of respect.
I'm sorry. Selfish. Yeah.
But I think one serious cost that we need to think about is if we are actually looking at a decline in text interface and text interaction. I mean, does that tie into the theoretical decline of reading or not? I mean, it's Steve Jobs who proclaimed that reading is over, that we're past that. Nobody reads anymore, he said in an interview. It's interesting that Apple doesn't make any text products, but let me set that aside. It's possible that might tie into it, and that if we're worried about the decline of reading, that we might look at interfaces like the Wii and think maybe this is part of it. It's a good question.
So if we could now move over, now we've covered the first two. Now I know that we wanted to talk about augmented realities, and if you would define the terms and talk about what's going on in those spaces.
Can I jump in? Or do you want?
Sure. So have people even heard the term augmented reality? Relatively new. So, see, we have some cutting edge people. You just don't have small children that spend time online.
We'll get some.
You don't keep any in your side pocket?
No, there was a 50s educational movie about kidnappers called Danger Stranger or something, and I looked just like that guy, and I was always the whole career path I missed. But please go on.
But the suit, it makes you look.
At a time.
Yeah. See, he outdid me. So augmented reality is it's pretty cool stuff, especially the mobile side of augmented reality. I forget the guy's name, but in Boston from MIT, used to wear a helmet with two cameras on it, experienced reality through augmented reality. Extremely weird. It looks like a really bad 50s science fiction movie. I actually saw him one day on the tee, and I've stepped carefully around him because he was kind of awkward in this get-up. But just now we're starting to see the computing power and the always-on connectivity that we have in, not my iPhone, unfortunately, because I bought 7 months too early before the 3GS came out, but the 3GS and Android, Google's OS for mobile devices. We have GPS in our phones now. We have a heck of a lot of computing power in there. Sadly, since I ride the subway most of the time, since my office is in downtown Boston, and I don't feel like paying $400 a month to park, I'm underground for an hour or an hour and a half of my day, and I can't take advantage of connectivity while I'm underground. But when you're above ground, what augmented reality does is overlays, sort of like Fight Club, if you like that metaphor, or The Matrix, or things like that. But it will lay some aspect of information on top of the view of what you have today. So if you open up your camera lens and you point it, it'll know as you're walking around downtown Boston, I'm the guy that everybody stops to ask for directions. I've had an office down there for 13 years. It doesn't matter, time of day, season, whatever, I'm the person that apparently I look trustworthy enough to be asking for directions, which is not a great idea. They apparently don't social network among themselves. They would know not to ask me.
But that doesn't help in Boston.
Yeah, exactly, right. I just say, get out and get on the train. You'll be fine. But if you hold up your device and you could be pointing at, instead of taking the duck tour, which I haven't done, and I've lived in Boston for 21 years, if you pointed at a building, you could get the history of that building right there in front of you, and not have to wait for a tour guide, not have to ask the guys who make it up on the duck tour, by the way. Or more explicit, useful information. If you get dropped into a foreign city and you don't speak the language, it could point out to sites that are friendly to you in whatever your language happens to be. This whole unveiling of the sort of hidden information that's around us is another thing that we've only just begun to. It's sort of like right now. Imagine what it was like to not have Google. How did we ever find anything? I forget. But I remember, because I was on Gopher before the web even existed, that I'm so glad that Google-like things exist today. I think we're going to be seeing that. I forget what the stats were. I saw a poll recently, something like 84% of people always have their phone on them. 48% or something say that they would die if they didn't have their cell phone with them. If you get used to having this augmented reality stuff at your fingertips anytime you need information on a map or whatever it happens to be, I think maybe we're all stupider for it, but we also have a richer set of information that we would have never had at any time in history.
I'm curious, has anybody tried any AR applications? Which one? And where do you use it mostly? And what are you looking for with Yelp?
What was that?
Yelp. Tonight.
I'm sorry. Wait. Sorry.
He's going back to the 30-yard.
Yes. Here we go. Sorry. And it was Yelp, you said.
Virtual mics.
YELP. Basically, it's like a digital eye, right? Like you say, right? I point my video camera, and it starts overlaying directory information on top of a building that you're looking at. So I look that direction, would tell me there is a Uno restaurant down the street or in that building. So you get it's a digital eye.
Yeah.
So some interesting applications that are being developed again at MIT where this has sort of come from.
Exactly.
Are examples where you have building facilities people looking at the wall and seeing the wires, or
Yep.
Joanne would like this. You look at the router and it tells you what the router's up to. So I mean, it's any kind of data. It's exactly.
So these are two great examples, and from the 90s you can find tons of stuff from the Media Lab, early AR experiments, people strapping cameras to their heads and stuff. There's a scale variety of these. Some of them are actually visually located, so you can take out your phone, point it at something, see what you're looking at, superimposed over it is data about this. There's a Dutch company called Layar, L-A-Y-A-R, that just started up that has about, 40 applications. So you're wandering around Holland. You can get house values. You can get historical markers. There's a Canadian project for a wonderful island that has lots of great historical value. They want to put markers up, but they want to disturb the physical contours of it. So you can walk around and pull down, oh, here in 1855 was this cottage. How awesome. There's a project in Los Angeles called 34 North, 118 West. I always get that reversed. Has anyone here tried this? It's a block in LA. When they first did this, they had a cell phone duct taped to the back of a laptop, and you would walk around, and where you were standing, you would pull down different pieces of a story. So over here would be the MP3 file of one story, and over here would be a photo, and over here would be a text file. Now there was a guy named J.D. Spoor who in 1997 came up with this idea where he said we would have a world board where we'd be able to queue all this data to physical locations. 1997, we're doing that now. I mean, AR, it's like, hey, there's this new thing, it's called the web. You want to check it out? I mean, that's where we are right now. The businesses are making money. Applications are there. This is a humongous potential thing.
But you're talking about today. So what about tomorrow? You wanted to talk about tomorrow. You know, this all seems, for me, this is boring.
Oh gosh, he's tough, isn't he? Well, one thing about this is that for most people, AR is totally new, and also very disturbing. And for example, I was talking with a DARPA researcher, a guy who liked to introduce himself by saying, "Hi, I'm from DARPA. I know more about you than you think I do." And we're talking about Baghdad, and they were discussing an AR layer around Baghdad where you could walk around. This is back when it was the what was it called, the Provisional Authority, and you could walk around and pull down files about certain locations. So here's where Saddam Hussein did this atrocity. Here's where this awful thing was. And I said, fine. Well, what if the insurgents create their own layer? What are you going to do about that? And he said, would you like to consult with us? I said, no. I just wanted to raise the idea. I mean, that kind of decision-making, how we control those levels, we haven't begun to start thinking about that. So one thing to think about is, this might be boring to you on a technological basis, but on a cultural, political, policy level, where Americans are barely used to the idea that we have mobile devices, this is going to be enormously challenging and exciting. So that's one piece of this. The second is gaming. In Japan, of course, with the Keitai, the Japanese phone, you have augmented reality games that are played on the streets of Tokyo. There was one in London, actually, called Uncle Roy All About You, where you can actually, it's wonderful. You watch it. It looks like people who have schizophrenia. They're walking around physically interacting with things that aren't there. They're like their minds on speed, right? And they see all this, but they're all part of this online. And you can do this without physical damage. I mean, that's just beginning to move. So I would definitely keep an eye on all the different ways that unfolds. I mean, again, you think, I remember in the early web, people saying, this is like Gopher, just a little better. All right, yeah, but there's more.
Just like horses, only a little faster.
Right.
I could see some real privacy issues. What if I, say, tagged you as you're a sex offender, so you don't have to show the video of stranger danger. That's right. Kid going up, he has a red aura about him. Stay away.
Yeah. Well, it's quite easy to do. I mean, we're waiting. I mean, Apple's iPhone App Store, would they be actually able to prohibit applications like that? I don't know. They've let through some really curious apps so far. Did you guys all see the shaking baby one, for example, right? So I don't know if they prohibit that. I don't understand their terms of service. Would that count, or what kind of things that wouldn't be? But already, this is stuff that's on the web. It'd be easy for me to build a mashup of a state's defender, sex offender registry with Google Maps, and there you go. And then you just walk out and pull down Google Maps and work your way through it. So, in a sense, the barn door is open, the horse is down the block. But that's a huge issue, and we're still not. When it comes to mobile devices, we're still beginning. I mean, even in the government world, people are still trying to figure out how to manage this. Yeah, it's a major issue. Good thing librarians are thinking about it.
If I could pose a question to those in this audience, of which there are many, who have started companies, all right? And the conversation we've had about virtual reality, virtual worlds, basic gaming, and this amazing thing called augmented reality, where does that resonate or not resonate, or what are you thinking about when you hear these type of things? Is it something it's interesting, but I'm continuing on my path, or does it augment the trajectory of your development efforts? If I could. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who've done companies or running companies now. What do you think? But yes, sir. Oh, it's always got to be the guy farthest away. It's a plan. It's part of my
closer.
diet plan.
There are two things. It's still not core to what we do, but still, when we think about it, it's about an interface, mostly for me. So we manage, we help IT people manage files, and there are a tremendous amount of them, and without powerful visualization, it's really hard to make sense of what you see. So a virtual, highly visual representation of what's important in your environment is something we might look into, as well as augmented reality is interesting as well, sort of like the person over there mentioned about assigning more value when you actually look at a physical asset. So that could be interesting.
Thank you. Somebody close has a comment. Thank you.
I'm taking pity on you. Okay, so 20 years ago, Brian, this is to you. 20 years ago.
Is this different from your Twitter feed?
I think it might be. I'm glad you saw that.
Both of them.
I built a device for my music students to use. and it was a Nintendo gestural controller. It was a hand controller. And they were conducting, and they were inside sound. And I thought, this is so cool, and they loved it, and they got it, and so did all the teachers and administrators who drifted into the room to find out what was going on. So now, 20 years later, my 2 children are strapping on their 50-pound backpacks full of textbooks and going to school to drill for standardized tests. It kills me. So I'm glad Pearson is here.
To solve
What
these
can
problems.
we do to, I guess, what can we do to make sure that creativity is valued and measured the way we value and measure other things? Because it's a disconnect for me.
Was that the Power Glove, by the way? I still have one in my basement, so thank you. Wow, so we're going to solve all of the world's problems in the next 5 minutes we have left?
No, that's a terrific question. And I started to compose a tweet in response while you're talking. I keep talking. No, it's actually pretty easy to do that. It's a huge question, and it has to do with a culture problem more than a technology or policy one. I know I mentioned a few of you that when I talk about gaming and I talk with K through 12 teachers are actually pretty responsive. They get nervous, but they get responsive. In higher education, if I mention gaming, people get embarrassed. They hide. I've actually asked people, have you ever played this game? I can watch people physically lower their hands because they're just going to say yes, but they don't want to embarrass themselves by admitting to playing a game. In academia and higher education, in elite culture in the United States, games mean psychological manipulation. Games mean business in a cross-tawdry way that we don't want to admit to, and games are for little children. It's a terrible cultural block to that. So one hack around that is to say simulation. So I've done things like I've showed Club Penguin. If you haven't played Club Penguin, you're a penguin, you walk around, and you throw ice balls. This is the penguin waterfowl simulation. I say with a straight face, and people are like, that's very interesting. It takes a minute to realize, it's funny! So that's a quick hack, and you should use. But when you mentioned simulation, there's a deep, it's not just a hack, there's a deep, rich history of simulation that we can use. So I think one thing is to start making that move and approaching games for the way they map onto reality. I think one of the downsides about using Second Life is in part because of the name, in part because of the weirdness of the interface, in part because of the kind of California culture around it, and in part because of the sleaze factor around it. It looks like a Second Life. And it's easy to say, I have a first life, I don't need a second one. But actually, there's got to be a reason to go there.
Ryan, it's fascinating that you answered the question that way, and I think you did a great job in that. And again, this whole session is about innovation. But tragically, it would seem that we have to trick the cubicle-dwelling drones. Or we have to trick them into. We can't let them know that they're having a good time. We can't tell them that they're innovating. We have to basically, wow, this is something else. This is simulation, very serious, very adult. And then we'll go do that. Is that the essence of the problem? Is that the culture is miswired? I'm going to go to my buddy from Pearson, who's going to jump in here.
Who are you asking that question to? No, I'll wait.
Did you want to respond first?
Or do you want to respond?
Sure, I'll respond to that.
Trapped!
I was going to ask a question, but this is more interesting. We're actually looking at games and gaming a lot. And I was reminded of a comment that Sir Ken Robinson made about when we're 2 years old, we're 98% of us can innovate. When we're 18, 2% of us can innovate, and we've got to squeeze all the innovation out. And I think one of the problems that we're having in education that we're seeing, and we can't simply solve the problem because we are a provider to the education industry. And the education industry is figuring out a lot of stuff. K-12 in particular. We were talking last night about how No Child Left Behind is effectively an implementation of a 19th century educational model in the 21st century, where we're not trying to teach kids how to sit at and do manufacturing anymore and be still. We now need to try to teach them to be knowledge workers and think a lot. So some of the things that we're investing in are things like in nursing, teaching people how to time on task. There's a whole field of stuff we're doing time on task, and we're just starting to get more into it. But what it really does is it says you need to, as an educator, use your time differently from how you were using it before to accomplish the same goals. So, and I think that extends also to the issues at work. I don't think the problem is that people don't want to have fun working. Everybody wants to have fun working, and everyone knows that you get more out of people when they're having fun. I think the problem is there's not clarity about for a steward of a particular task or a process, how to provide the leadership of getting people from where they are to where they need to be through a game. It requires a rethinking of things that we often don't give enough time to. And one of the things that Pearson does with its customers, we try to find ways to help our customers see the future before they actually, commit to delivering against it. So I think to the degree that places like Olin, can model that and provide prototypes so that people don't have to make that risky investment without first understanding what the implications are. I think that's a lot of it.
I think that's a terrific thing to hear from Pearson. And I would just say, please, because of your stature in the field, if you could support more work, not just using games and learning, but also about that, and showing people the different concepts that are involved so that it gains more intellectual heft than people seem that it already has. I think that would be wonderful to see. I thought you were going to talk about the Kindle and ebooks, Colleen, when you're talking about the weight of this. I think a second thing to recognize, though, is has anyone here used movies or television when you're talking with people in a workshop or a presentation? You guys saw that one movie, or it's like that one scene in The Godfather, or it's like that bit in The Sopranos about character building. I mean, one thing is games already have that kind of layer in our society. They're referential, and we can use them in that way. So that's one basis. I think, Colleen, it's a terrific question, and you hit it when you talked about creativity. By the way, the TED Talk by Ken Robinson is the one you should see. If you haven't seen it, go to the TED Talk sites and look for Sir Ken Robinson. That's the one where he talks about dancing, right, and creativity.
Final comments before we turn it over to Joanne, who's going to take us to our next moment.
Are you ready?
Sure. So, if you don't have kids and you don't think you have a valid reason to check out games and alternate realities and augmented reality, I think we've just given you a license to have a good excuse. All these things, they are billion-dollar industries unto themselves, so there must be something behind them. Otherwise, there would be no money in this. Some of the most advanced physics in the world that's being done now is virtual physics. How do you make alternate reality that's so real that you can't distinguish what happens there versus what would happen if you actually took a shoulder-mounted nuclear projectile and fired it off into space? All that stuff is actually helping to fuel some of the next generation of huge thinkers. You need to statistically model the economy to be able to play in the game for EVE Online. I'm not sure I would have wanted that as a child myself, but it actually there is serious. It was Michael Schrage's book, Serious Play, I think. We don't put enough stock in the benefits of having models or simulations, or God forbid we call them games, to actually wrap our heads around things. But this is a reason why I call myself distantly Danish. Six generations ago, I'm Danish. And the ability, actually, I know a guy who was behind the team that created the Mindstorms thing and the Lego Serious Play, and there's a whole lot of brain science around manipulating either physical or virtual objects helps to cement concepts into your head. And this is real stuff. It's not just academic. It turns out it's the science behind the original creation of these toys, but it actually does useful things to help change the way that both kids learn and adults. It's pretty interesting to see a crowd of 20, 30, 40 to 50-year-old modeling out the way that their teams are dysfunctional using Lego toys, and actually a whole lot of things surfaced that they had been completely ignoring as major problems in their organization, but they had been unwilling to talk about it, and by using a proxy for it, they could actually make a whole lot of change that needed to happen. They just were not willing to do.
Right.
I think I can decloak one part of my professional background. I'm a recovering English professor, and that always depresses people when I say that. But when one of the things that we keep finding is whenever humans come up with a medium, we rapidly figure out ways of telling stories with it. You know, if it's painting or if it's radio. And when podcasting took off, you had all these podcasters going, "This is a cool thing. We can tell stories with sound." And all these radio guys are like, "Yeah, we've seen that. We used to do that once upon a time." And we do this with DVDs in new ways, and we're using all these technologies to tell stories. And the minute you focus on that, people's technological anxieties begin to reduce. There's a pedagogy called digital storytelling, which teaches digital video. And I've seen that curriculum teach people Final Cut Pro who are not technologists, and they end up with a movie they can take away and show with pride. Because the minute you say story, people know how that works. That's where the creativity comes in. That's where the human feeling comes in. And that's an engine to watch. Now, no one person can keep an eye on it, so you need to exploit all your friends. Listen to all of your networks and find where these stories are being told. We can help. Thanks.
Round of applause for our panelists. Nicely done. Are we going?